The night Elara Voss learned what it meant to be invisible, she was standing in the middle of the most expensive room she'd ever been in, wearing a dress that had cost her 3 weeks of grocery money, and her stepsister was pointing at her shoes. Not subtly, not the way you might gesture toward something you wanted someone to notice. Lyra pointed the way people point at car accidents, arm fully extended, champagne flute tilted at a dangerous angle, laugh already escaping before whatever she was about to say had time to form properly. Are those, oh my God. Lyra pressed her free hand to her mouth, but not to stop the laugh, to hold it in long enough to make it worse. Elara, those are from the clearance bin at Winners. I can tell by the stitching on the heel. The ballroom of the Hotel Carteret in downtown Toronto was not the kind of place where people wore shoes from the clearance bin at Winners. It was the kind of place where the floral arrangements cost more than Elara's monthly rent, where the waitstaff moved like they'd been choreographed, where the chandeliers were original and the silverware was actual silver, and nobody talked about money because money was not something anyone in this room had to think about. Elara thought about money constantly. She thought about it the way other people thought about breathing. Not always consciously, but always underneath everything else. She looked down at her shoes. They were black. They were clean. The heel on the right one had a small scuff she'd tried to cover with a marker. She looked back up at Lyra. They're shoes, Elara said. They go on feet. Lyra's laugh broke open then, high and crystalline and designed to carry, several heads turned. Elara felt each one like a small, deliberate pressure between her shoulder blades. They go on feet, Lyra repeated, like it was the funniest thing anyone had said all evening. She turned to the man beside her, some associate of her father's, someone important enough to be here, someone Elara didn't recognize, and said, "My stepsister, everyone. Philosopher of the clearance rack." The man smiled the way people smile when they don't know what else to do. Elara's stepfather, Edmund Hale, was somewhere across the room doing exactly what he always did at these events, which was nothing that would help her. He'd brought her here tonight the way you bring a bag you're not sure you'll need, tucked under one arm, not entirely committed to carrying it. He'd said it would be good for her. Networking, he'd said. Connections. What she knew, and what he would never say out loud, was that she was here because Edmund Hale owed a significant amount of money to a man named Kane. Just Kane, no other name offered, no other name asked for, and Edmund's strategy for managing this debt was to bring his whole family to Kane's fundraising gala and hope that visibility counted for something. Hope that a man like Kane would see a man like Edmund standing with his wife and his daughters and think, "This is a family man. This is not someone you collect from." Elara was not his daughter. She was the daughter of his second wife, brought along like furniture from a previous house, never quite fitting anywhere in the new one. She picked up a glass of water from a passing tray and moved away from Lyra's laugh, away from the turned heads, toward the far edge of the room where the floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the harbor. The city was dark and wet. It had been raining all week, and the lights on the water looked like something that had been spilled. She was doing the thing she always did at events like this, which was math. Not consciously, it just happened. She'd look at a table setting and calculate the per-head cost. She'd look at a floral arrangement and estimate the labor hours. She'd look at the catering operation moving behind the serving stations and think, staffing, overhead, margin, who's managing this, and are they doing it well? It was how her brain worked, and it had always embarrassed her, and tonight it was the only thing keeping her from walking straight out the front door. She heard the room change before she understood why. It wasn't loud. It was almost the opposite, a kind of stillness that moved through the crowd the way a cold front moves through air, and Elara turned because something in her body told her to turn, some animal instinct she hadn't asked for. He came in through the side entrance, not the main doors. No announcement, no entourage fanning out around him. Just a man in a dark suit, charcoal, no tie, the collar of his shirt open by one button, moving through the crowd with the particular stillness of someone who has never once in his life been uncertain about where he was going. She knew who he was because Edmund had told her, Kane, The man her stepfather owed money to. The man whose name alone had made Edmund's color drain when he'd said it 2 months ago. Sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with the lights low, and his hands flat on the surface like he was trying to keep the table from floating away. Cain was not what she'd built in her head from that description. She'd built someone louder, someone whose power was performed, visible, designed to intimidate from a distance. She'd built gold cufflinks and a laugh that arrived before he did. This man was none of that. He was perhaps 40, perhaps older. It was difficult to tell because he wore his age the way certain buildings wear theirs, through density rather than decline. There was a scar along his jaw, faint but there, and his hands at his sides were not the hands of someone whose work was clean. He moved through people the way water moves through stone, not by force but by patience, by finding the line of least resistance and following it until everything else was simply somewhere else. He was not looking at anyone in particular. And then he was looking at her. Elara turned back to the window. This was automatic, the reflex of someone who had spent a lifetime making herself unworthy of notice. She counted the lights on the harbor. She took a sip of water. She thought about the per-head cost of the floral arrangements and decided it was probably $140, and reminded herself she was supposed to be networking. She did not hear him approach. She heard nothing at all, and then he was standing beside her. Not close enough to be inappropriate, close enough that she could see, in the reflection of the window, that he was looking at the same stretch of dark water she was looking at. "Hale's stepdaughter," he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said, because she didn't know what else to say, and she'd learned a long time ago that the best responses to statements like that were the ones that gave away the least. "You've been doing the math on this room since you walked in," he said. "Catering, staffing, florals. You paused on the bar setup for about 40 seconds, and then you moved on." Elara turned to look at him. She couldn't help it. She stopped. "That's an uncomfortable thing to notice." "Yes," he said. He didn't seem troubled by it. She looked at him for a moment. He had grey eyes. Not the romantic grey that people described in novels, the grey of still water or winter sky, but a flat, functional grey, the grey of concrete or industrial steel. Eyes that were not warm and did not try to be. "Were you watching me?" she asked. "I watch everyone," he said. "You're more interesting than most." She should have felt flattered. She didn't. She felt the way she felt when her stepfather described her value as something instrumental, something useful, a quality that could be extracted and used and set back down when it was no longer needed. "Why?" she said. He looked at her then, fully, with that flat, concrete gaze. "Because you're the only person in this room who isn't pretending not to calculate." She didn't have anything to say to that. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a card. Not a business card. There was no business name on it, no title, no logo. Just a phone number, printed in small, clean type. "I have a problem," he said. "A financial one. The kind that requires someone who can look at numbers and see what they're actually saying, rather than what someone has arranged them to say." Elara looked at the card. She did not take it. "I'm an administrative assistant for a logistics company," she said. "You have a Bachelor of Commerce from Ryerson," he said. "Graduated with distinction. You've been doing the books for 3 different small businesses under the table for the past 4 years, because your stepfather convinced you to take the admin job as a stepping stone, and then neglected to tell you the stepping stone wasn't going anywhere. You caught a $14,000 discrepancy in Northgate Distribution's Q3 report 6 weeks ago, and said nothing because you didn't know who had made it or why. The water below the window was very still. "I see," she said. "The card," he said. She took it. He moved away from her without another word, back into the crowd, and the crowd rearranged itself around him the way crowds always rearranged themselves around men like Cain, seamlessly, without acknowledgement, as though it had been the plan all along. Elara stood at the window for a long time after he'd gone. She looked at the card. She turned it over. There was nothing on the back. From across the room, she heard Lyra's laugh again, aimed at someone new. She heard Edmund's voice doing the social thing it did, warm and slightly too eager, the voice of Sen performing solvency for an audience that probably wasn't fooled. She put the card in her purse. She wasn't sure why. She told herself it was insurance. She told herself it was just to have it. She told herself a lot of things that night, standing at the window of the Hotel Carteret, while the rain came down over Toronto Harbour, and she didn't believe most of them. She called the number 4 days later, not because she'd decided, not because she'd made a careful, rational choice after weighing the relevant factors. She called because it was 11:15 on a Tuesday night, and she was sitting at her kitchen table with 3 years of her stepfather's financial records spread out around her, and she'd found something. Not a small something. Not the kind of discrepancy you could explain away with a rounding error or a miscategorized expense. The kind of something that had a shape to it, deliberate, patterned, arranged. The kind of something that someone had constructed carefully over time and then hidden inside the very ordinariness of the numbers around it, counting on the fact that no one would look closely enough. The phone rang twice. "You found something," Kane said. No greeting. Elara looked at the papers around her. "How did you know it was me? I only give that number to people I expect to call." "That's—" She stopped. "Yes, I found something, but I need to know something first." A pause. "Go on. Whatever I found, whoever put it there, is it someone who would come after me if I said something?" The pause this time was different, longer, the kind of pause that has weight to it. "Yes," he said. She'd known that. She'd known it the moment she'd seen the shape of it in the numbers. The way you know a bruise is going to be bad before it fully comes up, that particular ache telling you what morning is going to look like. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that makes me feel better," she said. "But you knew about the Northgate thing. You knew I'd seen it and stayed quiet. So you already know I'm not the kind of person who goes around announcing things. I need to know what you're going to do with whatever I tell you." "I'm going to correct it," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." She looked at the papers. She thought about the 14,000 at Northgate. She thought about Edmund at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, hands flat on the surface, colour gone. She thought about Lyra's extended arm, and the too high laugh, and the word philosopher said the way someone spits. "I'll come to you," she said. "Not here, and not somewhere you choose." "Where then?" She named a coffee shop on Queen Street West, one she'd worked near for 2 years, one where the owner knew her by name and the back table was always available, and the sight lines from every seat covered the door. "Thursday," she said. 7 in the morning. 7 in the morning, he repeated, and she couldn't tell if he was amused or simply noting it. "I work at 8, she said, though that wasn't why. The reason was that she needed it to be a public place at a busy time, needed the noise and movement of the morning around them, needed to not be anywhere that felt isolated or controlled. "Thursday," he said, and hung up. He was there when she arrived, which surprised her, because she'd arrived 12 minutes early. He was in the back corner, the table she always used, with a coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched. His coat was over the back of the chair. He looked like he'd been there long enough to have settled into the space. She ordered her coffee at the counter. She took her time. She was not going to rush to him. She sat down across from him and put her bag on the floor and placed a manila folder on the table between them. Not in front of him, between them. "Before I open that," she said, "I want to be clear about what I'm doing here." He waited. She noticed, not for the first time, that he was very good at waiting. Most powerful men weren't. Most powerful men filled silence with themselves, reflexively, because silence felt like space someone else might claim. "I'm not doing this for Edmund," she said. He's not a bad person. He's a weak one. There's a difference. But I'm not here for him. Why are you here? Because someone built something in those numbers, and I want to know who," she said. "And because whoever it is, they did it carefully enough that I think they've done it before. And that bothers me more than it probably should." He looked at her for a moment. "It bothers you because it's elegant," he said. She hated that he was right. "It bothers me because it's wrong," she said. "But also, yes, because it's elegant." Something shifted in his face. Very small. If she hadn't been watching closely, she would have missed it. She opened the folder. What was inside had taken her 3 days of work, spread across 2 notebooks, and a spreadsheet she'd kept on a thumb drive and nowhere else. She'd color-coded it not to be neat, but because her brain worked better with color, always had. She'd been 12 when she'd figured out that she could hold a financial structure in her head the way some people hold a melody. Completely, with all its parts running simultaneously, each one legible even when everything was moving. Kane looked at it for a long time without speaking. She explained what she'd found. She used precise language and didn't repeat herself, and didn't soften anything. The short version was this: someone inside his operation, not adjacent to it, not somewhere in the outer layers, where things could have migrated in from outside, but inside, with direct access to the primary accounts, had been redirecting small amounts to a secondary structure over a period of what she estimated was about 18 months. Not enough to notice in any single month. Enough to accumulate. She showed him the structure. She showed him the pattern. She showed him, in the last page of the folder, the 3 accounts the money had moved through, and the name attached to the holding company at the end of the chain. She watched his face when he saw the name. Nothing in his expression changed, but his hands, which had been resting flat on the table, went very still, the way things go still right before they move. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm not in the habit of presenting things I'm not sure about," she said. He looked at her again, that concrete gaze, flat and direct. "No," he said, "I don't think you are." He closed the folder. He picked up his coffee for the first time. He looked at the door. "This will need to be verified," he said. "I know. You'll need to walk me through it again with access to the full records." "I know. That means coming to my offices." "I know that too," she said. "I have conditions." He looked at her. "Of course you do." She didn't apologize for that. "I come and go on my own schedule. I have my own transportation. No one from your operation picks me up or drops me off. I have access to the records I need, only the records I need, and I keep copies of my own work, and when this is finished, Edmund's debt is cleared, not restructured, cleared." He was quiet for a moment. "The debt," he said, "was not the reason I came to you. I know that. It's still a condition." He looked at her for a long moment. She didn't look away. She had learned somewhere in the last 30 years that looking away first was a thing that cost you, even when the situation felt too large to stay in, even when everything in you wanted to step back. "Agreed," he said. She exhaled, very slightly. She hoped he didn't see it. "One more thing," she said. "Yes. The name at the end of that chain. Before you do anything, whatever it is you're going to do, I need 24 hours notice. I'm not asking to be involved. I'm not asking for details. I just need to not be anywhere near anything when it happens." He looked at her for a long time. "You have more nerve than most people I've met," he said. It didn't sound like a compliment exactly. It sounded like an assessment. "I'm also very good at math," she said. And there it was again, that small shift in his face. The almost thing. She couldn't name it yet. She just knew it was there. The offices were on King Street West, the kind of building that looked deliberately unglamorous from the outside, the kind of building you walked past and didn't remember. Inside it was different. Clean lines, everything functional, no art on the walls except for one photograph in the main hallway that Elara looked at for a moment before realizing it was the Port of Montreal taken from the water, grey and precise and somehow enormous. She worked there for 11 days. She came at 7 each morning and left at 6 each evening, and did not deviate from either, because the schedule was a thing she could control, and she was holding on to every controllable thing she had. She was given a workstation in a room off the main hall with a door that locked from the inside, because she had asked for one. She was given access to exactly the records she'd requested, no more. A man named Sayers, who said little and moved very quietly, and had the eyes of someone who had learned not to look directly at things that might look back, brought her coffee at 9 each morning and water at noon. Kane came in at different times each day, sometimes early, sometimes mid-morning. Once at 4 in the afternoon, he would stop at the door of her room, and she would report what she'd found, and he would listen and ask 3 or 4 very precise questions and then leave. He never sat down. She wasn't sure if that was intentional. On the fourth day, she found the second structure. She sat with it for an hour before telling him, because the second structure changed what the first one meant. It wasn't just money being redirected. It was information, transaction records, shipment logs, things that meant very little on their own, but in aggregate painted a clear map of how the operation moved, where it was vulnerable, what it looked like from the inside when the inside wasn't looking back. She went and found Kane. He was in his office at the end of the hall, had sink at a desk that was almost entirely clear, except for a lamp and a phone and a single manila folder. And he looked up when she knocked on the open door, and something in the way he looked up made her think that very few people knocked on that door. Most of them just waited. "Sit down," he said. She sat. She told him about the second structure. She laid it out the way she always laid things out, precisely, sequentially, without hedging. She showed him what she'd printed. She showed him what it meant. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. "The same name," he said. "Yes." He stood up and went to the window. It was a different harbor view here, not the romantic sprawl of the Carteret's ballroom windows, but the working waterfront, cranes and shipping containers, and the flat grey light of a November afternoon. "You understand what this means," he said. It wasn't a question. "I understand what it means for you," she said carefully. "I don't know all the details of what happens next." He turned to look at her. "Are you asking?" She thought about it. Genuinely, for a moment, she thought about it. She thought about what kind of person she was, and whether knowing the answer made her safer or less safe, and whether she actually wanted the accountability of having asked. "No," she said. He looked at her for another moment. "Good," he said. It was the first time she'd heard that word from him, and it landed differently than she expected. Not like approval, exactly, like recognition. She went back to her workstation. On the 9th day, Sayers was not in at 9, and there was no coffee, and she went to the small kitchen at the end of the hall to make her own, and Kane was already there, standing at the counter waiting for it to brew, looking at his phone. He didn't look up when she came in. She went to the cabinet and got a mug. She waited beside him for the coffee. The kitchen was small. The building was old enough that the ventilation wasn't particularly efficient, and it was warm in there even with the November cold pressing against the window above the sink. She was close enough to see the scar on his jaw more clearly than she had at the Carteret. Up close it was old, cleanly healed, the kind of scar that had been stitched properly. "You grew up in Montreal," she said. It came out before she'd fully decided to say it. He looked up from his phone. "What makes you say that?" "The photograph in the hall," she said. "Nobody hangs a photograph like that for aesthetic reasons. It means something." He looked at her. "You're not just doing math in your head," he said. "The math is just the part I can explain," she said. He put down his phone. The coffee finished, and she poured 2 cups without asking and put one in front of him, and he let her, which she suspected was not something he typically let people do. "Yes," he said. "Montreal? Family?" "Gone," he said. "Simple. Not sad the way some people say it to invite follow-up questions. Just descriptive." "Mine too," she said, more or less. He picked up his coffee. He looked at her in that flat, direct way of his, and she'd been around him enough, now that she'd stopped flinching from it, had started to read it almost like a language. The specific quality of his attention, what it said when it narrowed, or when it went still, or when it simply waited. "Hale's stepdaughter," he said again, the same words as the night at the Carteret, but different now. She couldn't have said exactly how. "Elara," she said, "that's my name." He was quiet for a moment. "Kane," he said. She already knew that. She said it anyway. "I know." He looked at his coffee. She looked at hers. Outside the window, the cranes moved along the waterfront, and the sky was the particular flat white of Toronto in November, the kind of white that isn't quite grey, but can't commit to anything else. On the 11th day, she finished. She put the last of it together at 3 in the afternoon, and sat with the completed picture for a long time, the way you sit with something finished, before you have to hand it over and have it become someone else's thing. She'd built the whole structure from the inside out, every account, every transfer, every cover, the name at the end of it, and the names around it, and the timeline, clear and documented and exact. She found Kane. He was in the hall, talking to Sayers in a low voice. He stopped when he saw her face. "It's done," she said. Sayers left without being asked. She handed Kane the completed file, 2 inches of paper, organized into sections, every piece cross-referenced. He took it. He looked at it for a moment, and then he looked at her. 24 hours, he said. She'd asked for that at the beginning. She was surprised he remembered the specific words. "Yes," she said. "Starting now," he said. "I'll need you to go somewhere you're known. Stay there. Don't go back to your stepfather's house and don't go home." She felt something shift in her chest, not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it, something with size to it. "Okay. Is there somewhere?" She thought about it. A colleague, a friend from university who lived in the annex and never went to bed before 2. A coffee shop where the owner knew her name. "Yes," she said. "There's somewhere." He nodded. She picked up her bag from the workstation. She stopped in the doorway. She didn't know why she turned back. She could have just left. She almost did. "Whatever he did," she said without quite looking at Kane, "the person at the end of that chain. Whatever he was planning, he was going to use it against you." "Yes," Kane said. "I just wanted to say that I know that." She wasn't sure why it felt important to say. "I'm not naive about what you are, or what this is. But I know what I did and I know why I did it and I need you to know that I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Elara," he said. She looked at him. "I know," he said. She left. She went to her friend's apartment in the annex and sat on the couch and drank tea and didn't explain much. And her friend, who had known her long enough to understand the shape of her silences, didn't push. She watched the city go dark through the window, and she thought about numbers, the way she always did. But she thought about other things, too. She thought about what it had meant that he'd said her name. She thought about the photograph in the hall. She thought about the word good, said in that flat voice, meaning something more specific than the word usually meant. Her phone buzzed at 7:43 the next morning. Unknown number. 1 line. "Debt cleared. You can go home." She sat with that for a long time. Then, because she was who she was and she could not help it, she opened her notebook to a clean page and began to write down what she knew, in order from the beginning. The room, the shoes, the window, the card, the coffee at 7 in the morning, the 11 days, the kitchen. His name said like a fact. She wrote it all down. She made it precise. She made it exact. She had no idea what to do with it yet. But she had learned, a long time before this, that the most important thing about a number was not what it was but what it was connected to, what it revealed when you held it next to everything else. And the number of times Kane had said her name was 2.